Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is The Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Stimulus, rescue, recovery, whatever you want to call it. It's officially called the American Rescue Act. Popular. In fact, one of those things where someone pointed out to me today, this is what unity looks like when more than 3/4 of the country agree on something. And who thought it possible? But when more than 3/4 of the country agrees that we need to do something, maybe you do it. And according to the most recent Politico Morning Consult poll, 76% of us strongly support or somewhat support the American Rescue Act. Only 17% say they somewhat oppose or strongly oppose the American Rescue Act. And it's one of those things where even Republicans, 60% of people who self-identify as Republicans strongly or somewhat support the bill. Only 30%. And I would argue those are the most ardent Trump supporters. The ones who, no matter what you're going to do, they're going to oppose it because Joe Biden's evil. Kind of like the guy in Florida who pointed a gun at his neighbor for flying a Joe Biden flag. Yeah, first it used to be just a man from Florida, but they're shipping crazy around the country. And that's something I could see happening in my neighborhood, to be honest with you. But yeah, big fun there. There's an opportunity to get some actual work done, but Republicans doing what Republican leaders in the Senate do and what we've become accustomed to and what we expect out of them. I think what we really expect out of them. I saw this interview with John Kennedy, not the former president, obviously, but the Republican senator from the state of Louisiana. And John Kennedy from Louisiana, he ain't liking no stimulus bill. Not happy. In fact, he says it's left of Lenin and chocked full of spending porn. And yes, folks from Louisiana know about spending on porn. Because according to Pornhub has reported Louisiana is the fifth biggest spender on porn in the country. So when he speaks, it's from experience. He goes on to say that the motto of the Biden administration is we can't spend too much. And to be honest, in a moment of crisis, when you need to get cash into the economy to get it going, I'm go big or go home. So I wish that John Kennedy would just go home, spend some time doing what people in Louisiana, fifth state, Mississippi, number one. Interestingly enough, notches in the Bible Belt. So there you go. He goes on to say that the motto is we can't spend too much. He said the people advising President Biden have an opium habit. Got a habit. And what was he so critical about? And this is the thing, it gets down to brass tacks. I want to hear what it is that is chock full of spending porn. What kind of porn is John Kennedy into? What's the porn spending limit for John Kennedy? What is it that gets his little Johnny up? Well, evidently, not a big fan of public transit. He's very angry that there's funds in the bill for transit. Very angry there's money in there for bridges. And really, I guess, not happy about the fact that they're preserving Native American languages in the COVID-19 response resources. Like, heaven forbid that we put things into the languages that people speak so that they can protect themselves and more than themselves, the rest of us. Just kind of throwing it out there. He's also upset about the $1,400 stimulus checks, and he says that the unemployment health care benefits are bad because they may. He's not saying they will. He's not saying they are, but they may go to those illegals. Now, again, I don't know how that happens. These are folks who generally are not on the IRS's, website. These are folks who aren't filing tax returns so that they can. I mean, this is the part that wow, okay, good on you. So for him, again, let me reiterate: transit bad, bridges bad, Native American language bad. Those are his three porn no-nos. Also very upset about the fact that Biden's going to put $130 billion into reopening schools without requiring them to go in person. Now understand, and I was just looking at these numbers that an education blogger put out the other day that showed that the spending on education has gone up while the actual cost of educators is deadlined. So teachers aren't getting raises. They're not, asking for, huge things, but the costs are going up. And the why is interesting because we're doing a couple of things. We're still paying for the brick and mortar schools because we have to, because we want them to be there on the other side. We're still paying to maintain them and heat them and do all those things because we don't want them, the pipes to freeze up and burst, ask the folks in Texas. And we're using new technologies that was an awful big hurry that corporate America is more than happy to cash in on. So it's not like all hands on deck. It's emergency crisis time. Corporate America is going to come and roll up their sleeves and actually do something. No, they want to make profit. So the amount we're spending on education is more. And this is one of those things where you go, yeah, that makes sense. Where my kids go to school, they go 2 days a week. Break in the middle so that they can clean and disinfect and do all that stuff. And then another group, half the school goes 2 days. And then those other days, the kids are doing the online stuff. So you're literally running dual school systems. You're going to need more resources, especially if you're going to do it well. But evidently, he's still very angry about that. Now, here's the thing. I expect someone like John Kennedy from a state that's 5th in porn viewing. I expect him not to be, overly up on things, considering all of the stuff that he laid out as his concern were laid out Monday in the 3-page talking point memo by the congressional Republicans. That's basically all talking points. That's what they got. That's what they're bringing to the table, folks. Not that, hey, we don't need it. Hey, we don't need funding for new things. No, it's all about... It's all about the transit projects. It's all about the education funding. It's all bad. You ever have a weird moment in the middle of the show where the door opens and you expect a gun to come in and shoot you? That just happened to me. It just happened, and I'm so glad that my producer warned me that the door was going to be opening to my studio. But this is one of those weird moments where this is John Kennedy's talking points, and the thing is Republicans don't have any ideas, and we talked about this the other day. There's nothing. There is literally nothing that the Republicans are bringing to the table. Please, if you're against this stuff, which they're good at being against stuff, they're really good at it. They're fantastic at being against stuff. What are they for? What are they bringing to the table? How are they going to remedy our problems? How are they going to fix our infrastructure? How are they going to do anything? You can't just go, we're going to leave it to the private sector. Because we're seeing what the private sector has done to Texas. They have no ideas. They have no plans. So it's all going to be, we're against it. And the weird thing is there's no leadership in the Republican Party right now. And that was played out today during a press conference where the House GOP leader, Kevin McCarthy, was asked if Donald Trump should speak at CPAC on Sunday. And, he was, yeah, absolutely. Yes, he should. And the number 3 in the House, Liz Cheney's like, well, no, that's up to CPAC. Let them do it. But she said, I don't believe that he should be playing a role in the future of the party or the country. And the number two standing there as well, Steve Scalise, he just shook his head. which is hysterical. And obviously McCarthy did not look happy, and ended it there. And he said, "On that note, thank you," and then exit stage. I think it was left. But here's the thing: Trump ain't going away, and I've been saying this for a while. A lot of people say, "No, Trump's career is over." I'm going, no, it's not. There's still crazy people who will do anything, like point a gun at their neighbor. There are still people out there who are willing to die loyal for Donald J. Trump. And, Mitt Romney's one of the few in the Republican Party who are going, hey, that's going to happen. Evidently, he did an interview with I think it was the New York Times. And he said, I don't know if he's running in 2024, but I'm pretty sure he'd win the nomination. He goes through the most recent polling data that show him getting 4% of the vote, Ted Cruz getting a whopping 3%. How bad does Mitt Romney feel that he only gets 1% more than Ted Cruz, than Cancun Cruz? How is that possible? Nikki Haley gets 6%. Mike Pence doubles that with 12%. And Trump gets 54%. So at this moment, Trump's the leading guy for 2024. And I expect Sunday when he gives his spiel, it's going to be basically kicking off his campaign for something. Will he do what Steve Bannon wants him to do, and that's run for a House seat so that he can orchestrate making Trump the Speaker of the House so that Trump can then, this is great daytime TV. Then Trump as Speaker of the House can then impeach Joe Biden. Could that possibly be happening? And, I sure hope not. Because here's the problem. If we're playing this reality TV show game, and I want people to really stop and think about this, because this is, believe it or not, possible. Entirely possible that Trump goes into a district that is Marjorie Taylor Greene kind of crazy and easily outspends everyone, ends up as a representative, and the Republicans fall in line and make him Speaker of the House. That is possible. And then he goes and he attempts to now this is all planning on if the Republicans take the House in 2022, which a lot of people are saying is probably going to happen simply because we're not getting things done. So this is, understand the game plan here. Democrats have a very short window, and they know they do. They've got to get moving on making people's lives better. The only way there isn't a bloodbath in 2022 is if things actually get done and people actually get their lives somewhat back on track, and somehow we get the economy moving. That's how we stave off a bloodbath in 2022. Republicans understand this as well. So they're going to obstruct, they're going to delay, they're going to gridlock, they're going to throw all the monkeys and the wrenches and all that stuff into the gears. So nothing gets done. So you and me and the rest of us continue to suffer and struggle and have the problems that we're having because of this virus, because they're doing everything they can do to get nothing done. And this is why I keep coming back to Democrats who keep telling me, well, I think there are going to be some Republicans, for the good of the country. And I'm going, what are you talking about? There are no Republicans left in this country who think that way. Maybe the 5 that voted to impeach him. Maybe you can get that. You're not getting 10. You're definitely not getting 10 in the Senate. And this isn't the Republican Party of we the people. This isn't all of the people who vote for Republicans. It's their party. And I keep saying this. I've been saying it for 16 years now. Take your party back somewhere near sane. I'm not saying full sanity. I know that's not possible. I know it's like you're not getting the people from Louisiana away from Pornhub. You're not getting near the sane line. But somewhere, please, somewhere. I mean, the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic and you still have this kind of gaming going on, I mean, it's literally insane. But sadly, and look, I'm just a truck driver, man. I don't have to break out my crystal ball for this. I didn't have to conjure the spirits. I didn't have to get out the cards. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to throw darts or flip cards or any of that stuff. It's what the Republicans have done. It's what they've telegraphed. It's what they're going to do. They are going to continue to do nothing and gum up the system so that nothing gets done. And the hope is that they will frustrate us to the point to where we just throw up our hands and either tune out or say, see, the Democrats aren't any better, going to vote for Donald Trump. At least he was entertaining. And understand, 2022 could be an absolute S show. I mean, it really could. If we don't get things accomplished. And this is where I keep going back to the Democrats having to go, you know what? Maybe you need to take the keys to the steamroller and drive it. Whatever you need to do to get Kelly, I don't know why I keep calling her Kelly, Christian Simona and Joe Manchin and Mark Kelly and Mark Warner and the others, whatever you need to do to get them on board with, we need a big chunky rescue plan. That needs to include a minimum wage hike. And not the paltry, pathetic $10 an hour that Mitt Romney and Tom Cotton threw out. I mean, stop and think about it for a second. The state where Tom Cotton's from, the minimum wage is already $11 an hour. I mean, how do you go back to your state and go, hey, I made the rest of the country worse than you? Because here's the thing, here's the argument. The argument that the National Restaurant Association, the other NRA, and the anti-minimum wage groups make is, you know, the states with the lower minimum wage, all the jobs are going to go to there. So if you're Arkansas going, hey, make the federal minimum wage $12 or you know, whatever, at least, you know, higher, so that we don't lose jobs. I mean, it's an idiotic argument, but it's what they've been saying here in Pennsylvania. The reason we can't raise the minimum wage in Pennsylvania is because we can steal jobs from all of the states that are around us, including West Virginia, who has a higher minimum wage. End of the story. Democrats got to get stuff done. They've got to get to work and do it quickly. And when we come back, we're going to talk with our good friend Rich Ojeda about how we get that accomplished. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1908. That was the day the United States Supreme Court decided the case Mueller versus Oregon. It was a landmark decision in the realm of protective labor legislation. It restricted the workday to 10 hours for women. Laundry owner Kurt Mueller required his female employees to work more than 10 hours a day against Oregon's labor law. The Supreme Court upheld his conviction and fine. Protective labor legislation was a product of the reform social movements of the progressive era. Reformers like Jane Addams worked to protect women from the industrial dangers that bred physical and moral harm to women. The decision drove a class-based wedge within the women's movement that lasted for much of the 20th century. Working-class women generally supported protective labor legislation like Mueller, but equal rights advocates like Alice Paul opposed it. They argued that protective legislation like Mueller rested on stereotypes regarding the differences between men and women. These differences often fueled anti-women discrimination, state control, and financial dependency. As well, critics remarked the ruling set a precedent for women's biology as childbearers as a basis for separate legislation. Only later would working-class critics note that the ruling did not cover domestics, agricultural workers, or white-collar workers. The 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act would supplant some parts of Mueller with its guarantees for workers of both sexes. Many working-class women would later welcome the passage of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act in 1965, which prohibited employment discrimination. Some would concede the many flaws of protective labor legislation that held women back. But women's rights advocates would continue to debate protective legislation and the Equal Rights Amendment well into the 1970s.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you'll be happy to know that one woman, her name's Elizabeth Mcdonough. She is the Senate parliamentarian. She is the one deciding whether the minimum wage increase can be included into the American Rescue Plan, thus giving the Democrats the opportunity to raise the minimum wage. She alone is the one, I guess hearings went on today, she is the one who will decide. Now look, there isn't going to be a Republican who's ever going to vote for it, but that's kind of a lot of power for one woman that nobody knows who she is. Which is why they keep saying these are really arcane Senate rules, and we need some serious changes. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on how we get things going, how we make sure that there isn't the bloodbath that I was talking about in 2022, and how Democrats need to get the steamroller moving. I've asked our good friend Rich Ojeda to come back and talk with us. Rich is a former state senator from West Virginia, former presidential candidate, and currently the executive national spokesperson for No Dems Left Behind. Rich, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, anytime, Rick. Always a pleasure, man.
So one woman has the power to either put the $15 minimum wage in the rescue plan or not.
Well, let's just hope that she is a woman who actually cares about people, because, I'm so sick and tired of watching us have no issues at all when it comes time to bailing out the banks, when it comes to bailing out the top 1%. But when we're talking about doing something for the average person out there that is working their tail off to try to keep their head above the water, it seems like everybody wants to fight over this. I mean, $15 an hour for 40 hours a week is $30,200. It's not exactly like we're making these people filthy rich. And when you think about $7.25, $15,000 a year, you have a person working at Wendy's and their husband is working at Arby's, and they are barely even able to survive. They can't provide nothing for their families. We can do so much better. We're the richest country on earth.
No, absolutely. And that usually comes with no health care, no retirement, no sick days, no vacation, none of those things. So we're talking about desperation jobs. And I know the right will say, Rich, well, those weren't meant to be lifelong jobs. Those were just pimply-faced teenagers having their first job. I know, I've heard it.
But what about when you come to where I'm from, the coal mines, it's literally been dig coal, sell dope, or join the army. And the coal mines are closing. Right now, we got coal miners that are making half pay because they're going into the ground and they're not bringing out coal. They're bringing out equipment because they're dismantling the mines. Other than that, all we have is Walmart, Wendy's, McDonald's. So what are we going to do? These people need more than $7.25 an hour. They got families. They have hopes, and they have dreams. They want to do more for their kids. But once again, if you give people money into their pockets, they spend it locally. If you give it to the top 1%, they hoard it. And we already know that. Let's do something for the people.
I'm right there with you. And that's why I'm in favor of the $1,400. I wish it was $2,000 like we were promised. And again, I don't want to explain the math. Which is why I'm in favor of that, because people are going to spend that. It's going to help our economy. It's a good thing. And I'd rather give it to somebody at the bottom of the scale than some rich guy who's going to just pocket it. You're spot on right. But that brings me to West Virginia, because everyone seems to be very unhappy with your senator, Joe Manchin, who seems to be the kind of the fly in the ointment, saying, well, he might be for $11 an hour, but 15 is way too much.
Well, the problem is West Virginia is one of those states. It's like Stockholm syndrome. Around here, the people at the bottom that could benefit the most from having minimum wage go up to $15 an hour are the very people that are screaming, they're going to shut down the business. It's never been that way. And everybody knows once you put money in the pockets of the people at the bottom, they spend it locally, the economy booms. And that's how it is. That's it. I mean, and we know that. We just got to convince these people to stand up and fight for themselves. If they want better, they've got to fight for themselves. And they need to be sending messages to Joe Manchin and say, look, we want $15 an hour. That's just what needs to happen.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I mean, we're watching the Republican Party who, they're reading the tea leaves, I think, like the rest of us are. They know if nothing gets done over the next year, there's going to be a bloodbath in 2022, and they're going to retake the House. And who knows, we may end up with, as Steve Bannon wants, Donald Trump as Speaker of the House. The way forward, the way to make sure that doesn't happen is to, as you guys put out in your ad reads, I think today, we got to reclaim the Democratic Party and find those values that made that party great.
Yeah, well, how come when the Republicans have the majority, they don't care? They pass whatever they want. When the Democrats get the majority, we're wanting to sit here and play nice. There's things that need to be done. We need to look at the Republicans and we need to tell them, look, we're going to get these things done, whether you like it or not. I'm all about working. I'm all about bipartisanship, but make no mistake about it. Once again, the Republicans don't want anybody to have anything unless they're in the top 1%. And if we don't do something and do something for these people, you're absolutely right. We could lose everything in 2022. And when you said Speaker of the House, Donald Trump, that just kind of made me kind of crack up a little bit. I mean, you got to have a little something upstairs to at least be in that position. And surely nobody's that crazy.
No. I don't believe that. I think the Republican Party is that crazy. I don't know if you've seen the recent polling numbers. 54% of Republicans want him as the nominee. Romney got 4%. Pence got 12%. Yep. Nikki Haley got 6%. There's nobody close. So the fact that he could find a Marjorie Taylor Greene district to run as a House member, there's no question he would win that district.
Well, I mean, it's sad, and a lot of it has to do with cowardice. We know that the Republican Party, anybody that's got any intelligence whatsoever knows that Donald Trump is an absolute train wreck. He's been a train wreck, and that's just the way that it is. But the truth is they are so scared of getting a primary opponent that they are willing to just go ahead and say, that's okay, we're going to accept whatever. They will be the reason why this nation falls, because they lack the moral courage to stand up for the people. All I can say is I hope people are watching Texas and seeing how these Republicans are acting, and I hope people wake up and realize that we're going to have to start electing people that are going to care about the people. That's one of the things I like about No Dim Left Behind. We're going into the red rural districts, but we're asking people. We're doing something different. We're reaching out to people and saying, hey, you know your area better than I know your area. So tell me, find me somebody that can run against Jim Jordan. Find me somebody that can run against Marjorie Taylor Greene so we can get behind them and we can beat these people and put decent people in Washington, D.C. that know how to, read, research, something like that.
I used to think that was, a joke, but, I don't think now it's too much to ask for. You're right.
Let me tell you, when Marjorie Taylor Greene says, if English language was good enough for Jesus Christ, it should be good enough for us. I mean, really, when Lauren Boebert, every time she opens her mouth, if you are within ear's reach, you become dumber. It's a fact. I don't understand it.
No, I'm with you. My favorite tweet of hers, I had to stop watching it. She said that, just because you're against something doesn't mean you get to change the Constitution. And she's literally a co-signer to an amendment change. I mean,
you can't make it up. You can't make it up. Ugh.
No, and this is the scary stuff. And this is where, in this moment, it's still going to come back down to how are you doing at the moment. If we don't take care of this virus, we don't get people back to work, we don't, begin to rebuild our infrastructure. It's going to be a long haul till 2022.
And the Democrats are going to have to step up and start speaking the truth here. I'm already seeing Republicans saying, well, Joe Biden's already been in so many days and there's 500,000 deaths. I mean, when are you going to step back and say, excuse me, stop? But there was nothing handed to Joe Biden. There was no infrastructure whatsoever. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to give Joe Biden the first 100 days, and every single death that's coronavirus is going to belong to Donald Trump until then. After then, I'll go ahead and start looking at Joe Biden and expecting him to do more. But in terms of what he has been handed from Donald Trump was absolutely nothing. No. And you know what? I'll tell you, I don't even think we could have survived another 4 years under Donald Trump. I really don't.
No, I fear you're right. But, in Biden's first 100 days, we still got the raging virus. And then what's going on in Texas? I mean, to me, Texas is another example of right-wing ideology gone really awry, and the fact that people have died from it. But and outside of that, you got people who are going to go bankrupt. Their homes are ruined, pipes have burst, frozen everything everywhere, all because they needed to suck a little bit of profit out of the whole system. And They didn't want to be part of the rest of the country.
Yeah, I'm just sick and tired of, look, I spent 24 years in the military. And yes, we are the greatest military. We're the most educated military, but we spend more than the next 25 countries, 24 of which are our allies, on military spending. And, think about that. We spend that much money on our military, and 10,000 jackaloons can take over our capital. I mean, we need to start focusing on other areas instead of just always throwing it towards defense. How about we focus on making sure that the power grid will be able to sustain any type of storms that we're about to face? And if the Democrats need to be the ones to step up to make that happen, then let's do it. Yeah. Because what we saw in Texas was pure greed. That was pure greed, and the Republican Party allows them to get away with it because they grease the pockets. Every electric company in this day, I tried to push for an investigation into Appalachian Power in West Virginia because I had people in single wide trailers getting a $700 a month electric bill, single wide trailer. And you know what? When my bill popped up, when my resolution popped up on the screen, it immediately disappeared. And the Senate president looked me in the face and went like this. He shook his head no. And the reason why is because Appalachian Power greases the pockets of every stinking Republican legislator and Democrat legislator in that daggone Capitol. And for that, they get their protection to do or not do what needs to be done.
Yeah, and it's, as you point out, it is obviously not just Texas, Pennsylvania, deregulated as well. And this goes back to, George H.W. Bush, who began the deregulation of the power companies, which is why in the 90s you saw that massive push of states like Pennsylvania deregulating because, hey, we were going to have the power of the free market. We were going to have choices. And when we went to heaven, God would tell us we're not in Pennsylvania anymore.
Yep. And then when they fail, we have to bail them out.
And that's the thing I'm going to ask you, because we see these stories. Yesterday I talked about this company Gridley, who sending out $20,000 bills to people who clearly most people. I don't know about you, but I don't have $20,000 laying around to pay a couple of day electric bill. So who's going to end up paying those bills?
Well, first and foremost, the people of Texas better be watching their Republican leaders, because their Republican leaders had better be standing up, fighting, saying, I'll be damned if I'm going to allow my people to have to pay those type of bills because of the lack of leadership and intelligence, if you want to call it that, from these companies in Texas. But mark my words, what's going to happen, and is it's going to end up basically being filtered back into the average tax-paying citizen in this country. And we're all going to be the ones that are going to pick up the slack for Texas so that those people don't end up getting those $20,000 electric bills. But at the end of the day, it's the electric company's problem, and it's the legislators' problem for allowing them to be able to pull themselves away from the regulations. Unacceptable.
No, you're right. And what's going to happen? There'll be a sacrificial lamb. They'll trot somebody out. Oh, he's responsible, and the couple companies will go belly up, and everybody will be, see, we took care of it. Until the next time, and the next time.
Until the next time.
And this, we just never seem to learn the lesson. So, again, I come back to the voters. How do you, as national spokesperson for No Dem Left Behind, talk to those rural voters who continually vote for people like George W. Bush and Rick Perry, who said people would rather freeze than have the government come in and take care of them? Really?
You have to educate them. You have to talk to these people with facts and lay it out to them, because the truth is, sadly, nobody watches, nobody reads the news. Nobody watches news stations anymore. They get everything. Are you there?
Yep.
Okay, for some odd reason, I just went blank. But they get all of their information off of Facebook. They get all of their information off of tweets that other people push. And at the end of the day, that's not the real news. And we've got to go down there. We've got to be able to show them facts of what happened. If you're talking about Texas and places like Ted Cruz, we got to go down there. We got to lay out, legislation that they have supported. You just have to educate these people, because at the end of the day, a lot of these people know know that people have short memories. And when the time comes, what they do is they'll show up there. It's no different than where I'm from. They'll show up here and they'll talk about guns. And of course, the Democrats are always going to take your guns, yet it's never, ever happened. They're going to talk about the LGBTQ community and talk about how they're going to fight the LGBT because they're so, because it's such a real problem in this country, I guess. It's God, gays, and guns, man. And as long as they push that, they win. And we've got to combat that by giving people the facts.
Yeah, I mean, and I hope people will go to your website, nodemsleftbehind.com. We'll get links on how you can do that, because ultimately this is going to come down to running decent people in elections and getting, good people to step forward and talk about this stuff. And look, you're going to take beatings in really red districts, but it's about fighting the fight, I think.
Well, we've taken a beating before, but here's the thing. Some of our candidates, we knew it was going to be an uphill battle. We know that we're probably going to end up losing some of these races because you're talking R plus 35, R plus 45 races. But you know what? Some of these people that ran did a pretty good job for somebody that running in a red rural district. And the truth is, we're hoping that some of them are willing to throw their hat back in the ring and get back in it again, because we believe that some of them may be able to pull it off. Tom Pausewicz in Wisconsin was a phenomenal candidate. Lindsey Simmons in Missouri, phenomenal candidate. We had some great candidates out there that were saying the right things. The problem is they're in deep, deep red districts. But once again, we're starting to make people notice, and that's key.
No, I mean, you got to be in the room and you got to explain ideas. Like, for instance, in this moment, there should be people out there saying, look, the Republican Party has no ideas. All we're seeing about the American Rescue Plan from Republicans is no, it's as John Kennedy said, it's leftist, it's Lenin style spending, chocked full of liberalism. And you go, wait a second, these are policies going to help people and their families.
Yeah.
What do you have to offer? And they have nothing. So I think that story has to be told.
Yeah. Is vaccine distribution a leftist program? I mean, guess what? Republicans are dying from the coronavirus too. Is Republicans, the average Republican citizen out here, are they struggling? I mean, the Republican Party has grown because so many so many people in the Democratic Party and Independent Party have switched over to the Republican because they like Donald Trump and the things that he said, but it doesn't really mean that they're real Republicans. Let me tell you something. You know what the biggest oxymoron there is? I mean, you could say Citizens United, you could say right to work, but the truth is it's poor Republican, because there's no such a thing. They don't realize it. They think they're Republicans, but make no mistake about it. At the end of the day, their own party would absolutely watch them starve and their family starve if it meant they would get to put a couple extra bucks in their pockets.
No, I think that plays out with it when you're looking at the minimum wage argument. The best plan they came out with is $10 an hour, and Tom Cotton is in a state where the minimum wage is already 11. It just is what it is. But Rich, I appreciate the time. It's always great talking with you. Hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
Always, Rick. I appreciate it, brother. Airborne.
Good stuff. Our good friend Rich Ojeda, former West Virginia State Senator, executive national spokesman for No Dems Left Behind. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1965. That was the day the Drug and Hospital Employees Union Local 1199 sent a telegram to President Lyndon Baines Johnson. The message declared the union's stand against U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. They were the first union local to take an official stand against the war. However, it should not have surprised anyone that Local 1199 was willing to take such a public stand. From their founding, they have been deeply committed to broad social justice unionism. The union started in 1932 in New York City. In the beginning, their membership was mostly Jewish men working in drugstores. During their first decade, they led pickets for a living wage and against segregation. During the 1950s, they held organizing drives in the city's not-for-profit hospitals. This brought many African American and Latino women into the union. These workers were often paid wages as low as $32 per week and worked extremely long hours. The union helped them win a $100 a week minimum wage. The union had become an important voice for workers in the city's nonprofit hospitals. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called Local 1199 the authentic conscience of the labor movement. The union expanded its organizing beyond New York in 1969. They helped organize a successful strike of hospital workers in Charleston, South Carolina. From there, they launched organizing campaigns of hospital workers in other states. Over the years, the union has stood in solidarity with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta's efforts to organize farm workers. They opposed apartheid in South Africa. They were also an early opponent of the war in Iraq. Today, the local is affiliated with SEIU, the Service Employees International Union. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So another shot to the Trump era deregulation, let corporate America do whatever the hell they want. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals today, I guess it was yesterday, the Ninth Circuit shot down another Trump administration decision. They wanted to propose, and this has been going on for a while. In fact, I remember 2013 when we were doing our labor history tour. I remember my Teamster buddy in, I think it was Arkansas, who was saying, hey, this is coming. They want to put one guy in charge of driving the train. And you go, well, you're just sitting there, watching the tracks go by. No, what happens if someone has a heart attack? What happens if someone gets sick? What happens if? This is just more greed, more hooray for them and less for working people. And here to share some thoughts on this decision and why this is important. I have asked Greg Hynes to come talk with us. Greg is the National Legislative Director for SMART TD. They're the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transport Workers. Greg, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, glad to be here.
So walk me through this decision. The court ruled, I guess it was yesterday now that I look at it, that they ruled that the Trump administration wanted to go to one person driving the train. This is going to open the door to leaving it at two. Am I getting that right?
Well, actually, they'd like to go to no people on the train is what they would like to do. And they're doing it step by step, trying to do it with one person. But the decision that was rendered by the court was, in my view, the correct decision. And what FRA, the Federal Railroad Administration, tried to do was they tried to use something called a negative preemption. They tried to say that by them not issuing a rule on crew staffing, that would preempt all states from doing it either. So they were basically saying, we're not going to do anything about regulating how many crew members are on a train, and we're not going to allow any states to do it either. And so the court upheld our argument, and states' rights prevailed, and rail safety prevailed.
So now this is on. So let me figure out how this works now. So individual states can say yes, we're okay with one or no one in the train, and others can say no, we want two. Can anyone say three?
Well, actually, Washington's crew bill allows for three people in certain instances. The state's bills are pretty much the same, requiring a minimum of two person on all of them. There are some variant differences from state to state. But we have several states that have passed the law. And so a lot of those states were waiting on this decision to know whether they could implement the law and enforce it. And so this means that all of the states that passed two-person crew, they're now in effect.
Now, like I said at the beginning, I remember in 2013, we did a cross-country labor history tour, and we ended up, I think, in Little Rock, if I'm not mistaken. And the guy we met there at the Teamsters Hall was saying, hey, make sure this is on your radar, because this is what the railroad companies are trying to do. They want to go down to one person. He said this is, and he went through a whole slew of why it would be a bad idea to have just one person in the train. Can you tell us what you think that those bad ideas would be to have one person handling the duties?
Well, you touched on some of it, the safety of the crew member being up there by themselves, because trains run through the most rural parts of America. You're in the middle of nowhere. I worked as a train conductor, And so if something were to happen to you, you're by yourself in the middle of nowhere, you're just on your own. But how it really impacts the general public on a daily basis is with crossing accidents. We have thousands of crossing accidents every year. We have 400 to 500 fatalities in crossing accidents every year. So when you think about the public safety aspect of it, if a train hits a vehicle in a crossing, it takes that train a long time to stop. Some trains could take a mile to stop. So by the time they're stopped, they're blocking the crossing. If you have one person on that train, you don't have anybody to go back to see what happened, see how bad the damages are. When I've worked in these situations where we hit a car on a crossing, the first thing the conductor does is get off the train to go back to assess the damage, relay that to the engineer who's on the radio with emergency services to dispatch what they need, how serious it is, whether it's serious or not. And if there was only one person on that train, when you hit a car in the crossing, that engineer can't abandon his train. He would have to secure it before he could get off of it, which would take at least 45 minutes. So what he'd have to do is call the railroad, and they'd have to send somebody out there. And anybody who's been involved in any kind of traffic accident, that seconds count. So if you have to wait an hour for somebody even to come out there to assess what's going on there, you have a real problem. Not to mention that when that train stopped on those crossings, no cars can cross that crossing because the train's blocking it.
Right.
What happens in these situations, the conductor, if he needs to make a separation in the train to allow emergency vehicles through, he can make a separation right then, allow the emergency vehicles through, and they can do what they need to do. If there's one person, that's not going to happen unless the railroads send somebody out to that location. So it's just ridiculously unsafe and greedy.
And I got to be honest, it doesn't sound like you're taking one additional person off. In the big picture, I mean, we're talking about multi-billion-dollar industry here. That it would save them that much money. I mean, it's like looking for change in the couch cushions. It seems like that to me. This seems punitive more than anything.
Well, it's more about that the railroads are dictated by Wall Street now. It's all about the operating ratio to create the highest profit margin as possible. And the way they're doing that, it used to be, let's think of it like a tree with a lot of fruit on it. And the railroads used to, and all the fruit are customers and rail shippers. And the railroads used to harvest the entire tree. And there was profit in all of the fruit. Some fruit was higher profit margin than others. So what the railroads have done now is decided, well, we're only going to pick the fruit that has a really high profit margin, and we're just going to let the rest of it go so that their operating ratio is increased so they can show making more money by doing less. So it's basically doing less with less. And the shippers have a big problem with the greed that's happening because of Wall Street as well as us. Yeah. And safety has been thrown to the wayside. They want to get rid of all the people doing inspections. They want to get rid of all the people doing track maintenance. They want to get rid of the people that do air tests and brake tests on the trains. It's really getting to a dangerous point. And if Trump had another 4 years, I'm afraid for the situation that America would be in the next coming years.
No, I'm with you. And as I'm looking at what happened in Texas, again, when you take regulations away, you let corporate America follow their natural path to lining their pockets at the expense of the rest of us. There's nothing but bad down the road. And that was one of the questions I was going to ask you, because I remember when I was a kid, this is going back late 70s, early 80s, we used to spend a lot of time hopping the trains. We'd take it from Cleveland out to Bellevue, Ohio. We'd do all kinds of things on the trains. But there were a bunch of people that worked on those. I remember there were two guys sitting in the caboose. I don't even know if they have cabooses anymore. So we're down to two now, because I remember there used to be several. What happened to whittling that down?
Well, it's all been because of technology, and it's all about technology. And the railroads don't look at technology as a way to make the railroads safer. They look at technology as a way to eliminate crew members. I'm a fifth generation railroader. So my family has been working for the railroad over 100 years, and I've seen these changes come. And for instance, you mentioned the caboose. The caboose was, they got rid of the caboose when they invented something called an end of train device. So they wanted to take those crew members off the rear of the train. They have an electronic device that can be administered from the engine that would put the train in emergency from the rear. One of the reasons you had crew members on the rear is if there was a problem with putting the train into emergency and they couldn't do it from the head end, you could do it from the rear end because you had people back there that could put the train in emergency. So they created this end of train device that replaced the caboose. That was in 1985. Those end of train devices fail every single day on the railroad. We had 2 fatalities last year because of a failure of an end of train device. So end of train devices didn't make the railroad safer. They just made it with less people, which has been the goal all along. They've gone from 5 people on a crew down to 2, and they want to go to 0. And they're crying that they have to do this or they won't be profitable at a time when they're making more profit than they have ever made in the history of the world.
You know, it just goes back to that question, how much is enough? And I remember the CEO of Caterpillar saying, it's never enough. I want more. I always want more. And this is another example of that. It's never enough. And what sadly ends up happening, as we've been discussing, we're the ones who end up bearing the cost of the external costs of more accidents, of more fatalities, of all of the things that come because of this. So the question that I come back to is, yeah, this is good. This is a good start. I'm glad the Ninth Circuit made the right decision. About time. How do we make sure that this doesn't continue to be an issue? Because I remember hearing about it back in 2013. This has not gone away, and I fear that it's not going to go away, now. How do we make sure it goes away? We make sure that our trains are safe, our transportation networks are safe, and the transportation workers are safe.
Well, elections matter. And because of Joe Biden getting elected, we can put the brakes on a lot of this horrible stuff. The deregulation attitude that everyone's had, there's been such a narrative that regulation bad. We need businesses to make tons of money. They don't need oversight. I mean, look what happened in the airline industry with the FAA and Boeing. I mean, that's what happens when you let these industries self-regulate. You have problems like the 737 MAX. It's the same in the railroad. Now, if you let the railroad self-regulate, you're going to have people dying. We have a code of federal regulations for railroad that oversees regulatory issues with railroads. It's over 1,000 pages. And those regulations were written in blood. Every one of those regulations came about because people died because of bad behavior by the railroads. If you trust the railroads to do the right thing, they won't. We have a 150-year history proving that.
No, that's an excellent point.
Now with the Biden administration and having adults in the room again, we're working very hard at rolling back a lot of the waivers that were granted. The Federal Railroad Administration under Ron Batori, a former CEO for a railroad, they were rolling back and granting waivers to all the railroads whenever they asked. Oh yeah, you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to do that anymore. All about saving the railroads money and with no interest to safety. And now we have people back in the FRA, thanks to Joe Biden's victory, who care about safety again.
No, that's an incredible thing. But I want to go back to something you said a second ago, that every one of those pages of regulations were printed with people's blood. Because we hear an awful lot from the Republicans about, job-killing regulations. I hear it all the time. Job-killing regulations. Got to get rid of those job-killing regulations. But we don't hear an awful lot about when someone gets killed and it's because they've taken away those protections. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think people need to understand that there's a reason these regulations were put into place in the first place, and that's because something bad happened.
Oh yeah, and the unions, the rail unions were formed because of the bad behavior, because of safety. We were into safety long before we were into collective bargaining, of taking care of our people, because the railroads wouldn't. It used to be if you got injured, you were fired right before that injury happened. And it's all about having no liability and no accountability to their employees. It's really sad. And the term being railroaded has been around for a long time. It's a derogatory term, and it was well earned by the railroads. Nobody says you got railroaded if something good happens.
That's a good
and
point.
That's across the board.
But I'm glad you brought that up as well, because one of the things that what's happened to our society is we stopped talking about that history. We stopped talking about how bad things were and how it was unions fighting for better wages, hours, and conditions, how it was fighting for good regulation in government, how it was fighting the good fight against corporate America to make them do the right thing that provided the things that we take for granted today.
You're exactly right, and I think that we're going to get back on that track and working towards that going forward. I mean, we had the Rail Safety Advisory Committee, which for the last 25 years has been the carriers and labor and the regulatory agencies working together to craft valuable regulation. If the railroad was going to talk about crew staffing, get all the players in the room, work it out, and come up with a solution. That stopped happening as soon as Trump was elected. They completely disbanded it. They let the charter run out, and then they wanted to reinstate it at a much watered down version. So this deregulation that Trump was on was very harmful to the safety of American railroads.
No, we got a lot of work to do. I hope people will check out your website, fightfor2personcrews.com. That's fightfor2personcrews.com. We'll get links out on social media how folks can take a look at that. But I wanted to ask you, back in 2020, there was a piece of legislation introduced in the Senate, the Safe Freight Act, Senate Bill 1979. Is that going to be reintroduced here in this session?
Well, actually, the two-person crew bill, which we've been running since Lock-McGantic happened, that got passed out of the House in H.R. 2, the infrastructure bill that was passed and sent over to the Senate. Of course, Mitch McConnell has done absolutely nothing with it, and we're very hopeful and optimistic that that language will remain in the base bill for the infrastructure package. There was a rail safety title in H.R. 2 that covered a lot of the things that we've been working on for a number of years. So that's already passed the House. And now that we have Democrats in charge of the Senate, we feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, because we do need massive infrastructure investment. And interestingly enough, rail gets the best grades from the American Society of Civil Engineers. They get a B grade. So good on you guys for fighting to make sure that infrastructure is well kept. But we can always do much better by making sure that we don't have the kind of tragedies that you were talking about because we don't have cabooses anymore.
Right. And it's not just the freight rail. I mean, in passenger rail, this is a little bit off a topic, but it's still relevant. When we had the insurgency in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, a lot of those insurgents or domestic terrorists, whatever you want to call it, they traveled to D.C. on passenger rail, on Amtrak and on the MARC, and they were unruly. They wouldn't wear masks. They were belligerent to the other passengers and the crew members. They refused to get off the train when told to. There wasn't enough security to deal with them. And one of them was got off the train, was searched, and had a machete in his backpack. So I'm very confident that there were a lot of weapons on Amtrak. Jeez. And TSA has jurisdiction over Amtrak. And we want to see TSA have a presence at Amtrak. And that way they would have access to the don't fly list. And anybody who's on a don't fly list shouldn't be riding a train either. So we've got a lot of work to do on freight and passenger, and it's going to be very busy the next few years.
And I hope you'll come back and share with us all of those things. Greg, I appreciate you taking some time sharing these thoughts with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Greg Hynes, National Legislative Director for the SMART Union, the good folks at the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transit Workers. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. the U.S. Congress passed the child labor tax law. At the turn of the 20th century, child labor had increasingly become an issue of concern in the United States. In 1890, the census found more than 1 million children between the ages of 10 and 15 in the workforce. By 1910, that number had exceeded 2 million working children. Many of these children worked long hours in unhealthy conditions for low wages. Progressive activists led campaigns to bring national attention to the plight of these working children. As a result, many individual states passed limits on children's work. Nationally, there was no uniform legislation. Southern lawmakers were unwilling to push for child protections because local factory owners insisted child labor was necessary if Southern businesses were going to compete with manufacturers in the North. The state laws that did exist were poorly enforced, especially in Southern states. In 1909, a survey of South Carolina mills found that nearly 92% of them were violating what little child labor regulations were in place. In 1916, the U.S. Congress attempted to regulate child labor, but a federal judge ruled that legislation unconstitutional. Undeterred, Congress tried again in 1919. They passed a law that said companies in certain industries would face a 10% tax on their profits for hiring child labor. The act defined child labor as any worker under the age of 16 in any mine or quarry and under the age of 14 in any mill, cannery, workshop, factory, or manufacturing establishment. Within a few years, the Supreme Court found that law unconstitutional. In an 8-1 decision, the court ruled that Congress could not use taxes to enforce regulatory power. Although it was only in effect briefly, the child labor tax law did cause a downturn in the use of child labor. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Many Americans can't believe that political coups are part of our country's history. But consider the Wall Street Putsch of 1933. Never heard of it? It was a corporate conspiracy to oust Franklin Roosevelt, who had just been elected president. With the Great Depression raging and millions of families financially devastated, FDR had launched several economic recovery programs to help people get back on their feet. To pay for this crucial effort, he had the audacity to raise taxes on the wealthy, and this enraged a group of Wall Street multimillionaires. Wailing that their, quote, liberty to grab as much wealth as possible was being shackled, they accused the president of mounting a class war. To pull off their coup, they plotted to enlist a private military force made up of destitute World War I veterans who were upset at not receiving promised federal bonus payments. One of the multimillionaire's lackeys reached out to a well-respected advocate for veterans, retired Marine General Smedley Darlington Butler. They wanted him to lead 500,000 veterans in a march on Washington to force FDR from the White House. But they chose the wrong general. Butler was a patriot and lifelong soldier for democracy who in his later years was critical of corporate war profiteering, and he was repulsed by the hubris and treachery of these Wall Street aristocrats. He reached out to a reporter, and together they gathered proof to take to Congress. A special congressional committee investigated and found Butler's story, quote, alarmingly true, leading to public hearings with Smedley Darlington Butler giving detailed testimony. This is Jim Hightower saying, by exposing the traitors, this courageous patriot nipped their coup d'etat in the bud. But their sense of entitlement reveals that we must beware of the concentrated wealth of the imperious rich, for it poses an ever-present danger to your and my majority rule.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So to this point, I'll be honest, I'm happy with the Biden administration. You know, as we just talked about, a lot of the deregulation that happened during the Trump years being pushed back on. Good, need that. A lot of the insanity that the Trump administration pursued in courts, the Biden administration has stepped away from. I think that's a good thing. The question is, you know, as we get down the road, what's it going to look like? And education seems to be front and center on a lot of folks' mind. And I'm curious to find out about the Biden-Harris education team. That's why I have asked Tom Ultican to come talk with us. Tom is a teacher and education blogger over at Ultican.com. Tom, thanks for taking time for us.
How you doing? Good to hear you, Rick.
So let me ask you right to start. We've got the first. We're out of the first month. What are our thoughts so far of what the education team that Biden's put together what's it look like?
Well, the education team, in a way, looks pretty good. He picked a teacher, Cardona, a guy that's been an administrator and been a teacher, studied education, to be Secretary of Education. That's different. We haven't had that pretty much ever, not since maybe Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Education, who gave us the Nation at Risk, Ted Bell. And then, but the one that really excites me is that he picked for Deputy Secretary of Education Cindy Martin from here in San Diego. And Cindy is special, and I think she's going to be a real friend of public education and is going to do quite a few things. However, I'm a little bit concerned by what's gone on this week, where we got news yesterday that the Department of Education is not going to give let any districts off from doing standardized testing this spring.
So say that again. They're not going to give any waivers on the standardized tests?
That's what the acting Secretary of Education, Phil Rosenblatt, put out yesterday.
So how are they going to work that if we're not in classes?
Oh, it's really strange. It's like, this looks like something where we really have to take care of those big four in the education testing environment. Hardcore Education Measurement and McGraw-Hill and Riverside Publishing, owned by Hooten Mifflin, and of course Pearson. We've got to take care of them. So if we can't do the testing in class, well, we can do it remote. And if we can't do it remote, then you might be able to put it off until the fall, which kind of undercuts the whole idea of doing standardized testing if you're going to do it different ways and months apart. But that's what he announced.
So I got to wonder, now that I'm thinking about it, because I thought these standardized tests were off the table for this year again. I got to figure out if I have to trek into the school again and opt our kids out of the standardized test, or if I'll be able to do that remotely.
Well, you would think you'd be able to do that remotely. I know Diane Ravitch put up an opt-out form on her website today, on her blog for New York, but I think that's the same form ought to kind of work anywhere.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, you used to have a religious reason for doing it. And I had to go in there and explain that I have a religious exemption. I have a sincerely held belief that I shouldn't do to others that I don't want done to myself, and I won't do something to somebody else that I wouldn't do to my kids, so I don't want my kids taking the test. The ethic of reciprocity, I think, goes across all religions. Do unto others.
Yeah.
So I think I'm on pretty safe religious ground there. But I'm against the idea of these standardized tests. As I tell the kids, not because I'm against testing, huge fan of testing, love testing. Every Friday you should have a test. I'm against tests that you take in the spring and don't get until the fall. I'm against tests that don't help the students actually figure out what they don't know. I'm against that. I'm against profit testing, which is what this is.
Then they say these strange things like we need to know where the students are at so we know how to give them the resources and we know what they need and how far they may have slipped behind. Well, teachers know where the students are at. That's what they do all the time. That's kind of part of being a professional teacher. And we know that they've slipped behind some. That's just the nature of what's been going on. And the fact is, they've never put any resources where it needed help. All they've used testing for is to try to get rid of the public school and privatize it. And
I keep coming back to that, and that's the thing that bothers me. And I look at, someone like, some of the names that they've thrown out to run other offices that, kind of worry me. I look at the woman, I guess she was the former governor of Rhode Island that they're going to make Commerce Secretary.
Gina Raimondo and Neera Tanden and Bruce Reed. Those are some real winners. And then you've got Kathleen Hobbs-Demers and Danny Durante, a couple ex-employees of TFA. I mean, there's some real. I was real concerned about those people.
So the question because when I see those names, I wonder, how much of this is a throwback to the Obama era, to Hillary Clinton, to that kind of Arnie Duncan-esque kind of thinking.
Well, I think it is somewhat. I think what it's really a throwback is on neoliberal ideology. I think there's a lot of neoliberals in the Biden administration. Biden kind of predates neoliberalism, and I don't know if he's a real hardcore neoliberal or not, but he certainly has a bunch of people like Bruce Reed and Neera Tanden and Gia Raimondo who are definitely, that's the philosophy they embrace. That's that Clinton team philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, again, when you start talking about this stuff, you start seeing the players that they put in, you start worrying. And while I have great hope that this administration is going to do good things, there's always going to be that one, isn't there?
Well, this is kind of interesting too. Is that I'm kind of withholding being totally upset by this, because this was announced by Phil Rosenfeld, who he's got a reputation as being part of this privatizing group, big pro charter school guy before he came into the education department. He's the acting secretary right now, and he's the person that did the announcement. On the other hand, Biden had a big education summit in Pittsburgh, I think it was in like September or October, and in which he was very explicitly anti-testing. He was very explicit about it. A investigator named Jones, she asked him the question point blank, and he went on for about 5 minutes about why he was opposed to testing.
So there is hope then. So there is.
Yeah.
Hope.
So I'm hoping that this isn't. I'm a little bit worried about this Cardona guy. He hasn't been a big promoter of charter schools or a big promoter of standardized testing, but he has indicated that he thinks standardized testing tells him something, and he thinks that there's a place for charter schools. So that's not real warm and fuzzy for me.
Yeah, there's a place for charter schools after we've fully funded everything else. There's a place if you want to do things a little differently. I totally agreed with the original concept of having public schools that try things a little bit differently. Because look, I'm an experiential learner. I would have rather had more hands-on kind of things. I'm not against trying new things. I'm against taking public education dollars and putting them in the hands of profiteers. That's what I'm against. I'm against the whole cyber charter thing that has been an abysmal failure for the vast majority of students that do it. And unfortunately, most of us right now who have kids have kind of gotten a sense of what a cyber charter school looks like. And hopefully this is not going to be the launching point that everything's going to go online. Because I think most people are going, I'm ready for it to be over.
I think this has actually really hurt cyber charters going forward. That's just kind of my personal opinion. And I'm looking at charter schools. Like when charter schools first started, I was kind of right there with you, and I knew some people that started charter schools, and they were really interesting. And the reason they started charter schools is that's when we got No Child Left Behind, and they were no longer able to teach the way they thought you should teach. And so they started some really nice little charter schools. The problem is the charter industry now has been taken over by these management companies, and it's just big business now. And there's very little in the way of anybody coming up with anything new in charter schools. In fact, most of the innovation comes in the public school system.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of it, from what I've been reading and what people have told me, It's about fleecing, all of the things that go into a school, getting the contracts for, the landscaping and the roofing and all of that stuff. It's about cashing in. It's about property more than anything, and that's the frightening thing in this.
Well, it's become a business. They call it nonprofit, but then behind the nonprofit, they're feeding all their businesses, the ones you just announced there, and the other thing with the charter schools is they're another school system. So you're running multiple school systems. Well, if you really want to run multiple school systems, that's fine, but you need to fund them.
Yeah. So last line of questioning I've got for you, because in looking at this, you're the expert here. You're the one who pays attention to this more than I do. What are you looking for over the next several weeks? What's going to be the signal for you as you're watching what they're going to start doing once they finally get all the pieces in place and everyone gets confirmed and in their offices?
Well, I really don't know what to look for. I'm hoping that we have some turn away from this god-awful testing regime, that we at least start talking about reducing it, and that we also do something about taking the federal money out of expanding charter schools. I mean, we're spending $400 million a year to expand charter schools in federal dollars. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, we'll see how this plays out, and once everyone gets into place and see what that first set of policies look like, and then I think that'll give us a better sense. But Tom, I appreciate you taking some time for us. Good stuff. I hope people will take a look at your most recent article on the Harris or the Biden-Harris team, education with the Biden team, written by Tom Ultican. We'll get links out on how you can take a look at that. I appreciate the time, Tom. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, Rick. It's fun talking.
Have a great night. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1908. That was the day the United States Supreme Court decided the case Mueller versus Oregon. It was a landmark decision in the realm of protective labor legislation. It restricted the workday to 10 hours for women. Laundry owner Kurt Mueller required his female employees to work more than 10 hours a day against Oregon's labor law. The Supreme Court upheld his conviction and fine. Protective labor legislation was a product of the reform social movements of the progressive era. Reformers like Jane Addams worked to protect women from the industrial dangers that bred physical and moral harm to women. The decision drove a class-based wedge within the women's movement that lasted for much of the 20th century. Working-class women generally supported protective labor legislation like Mueller, but equal rights advocates like Alice Paul opposed it. They argued that protective legislation like Mueller rested on stereotypes regarding the differences between men and women. These differences often fueled anti-women discrimination, state control, and financial dependency. As well, critics remarked the ruling set a precedent for women's biology as childbearers as a basis for separate legislation. Only later would working-class critics note that the ruling did not cover domestics, agricultural workers, or white-collar workers. The 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act would supplant some parts of Mueller with its guarantees for workers of both sexes. Many working-class women would later welcome the passage of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act in 1965, which prohibited employment discrimination. Some would concede the many flaws of protective labor legislation that held women back. But women's rights advocates would continue to debate protective legislation and the Equal Rights Amendment well into the 1970s.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
This is a fun story. Judge Margaret Van Hooten She's a judge in the Third Circuit Court of Michigan. She rejected the call to toss the case against two conservative activists. You may remember these two idiots. I shouldn't say that. That's not right, is it? A 54-year-old guy named Jack Berkman and a 22-year-old guy named Jacob Wall. You may remember them. They're the two of them, which is kind of a weird coupling. I get a strange vibe there. But anyway, they're pranksters. That's how they're framed. I say they're criminals, but I guess you put it however you want. They were arrested and charged because back during the election, they thought it was a good idea to do a bunch of robocalls in a number of predominantly minority areas, telling them, places like Detroit, telling them that if they voted by mail, they could be subject to being arrested. They could be subject to debt collection, or they could be force vaccinated. So they ran these robocalls, and I know it was a joke. So funny. Pranksters they are. All the hijinks. Anyway, the two idiots got arrested, claiming election interference, voter intimidation, because Michigan does have some laws about that. Well, Berkman and Wall claimed, no, what we didn't violate the intimidation law, and they're protected. They're protected by the First Amendment. Yeah. Again, let me walk this real quickly back to a place of easy explanation. You don't have the right to lie like that. Your freedom of speech comes between you and your government. Pretty simple. You don't have the right, especially during an election, to pull the stunt that they pulled. And I hope they both spend time in jail, and the judge threw this out. Now understand, this is part of a misinformation campaign to get people to shy away from voting, especially in minority communities that are a little gun shy to begin with about voting. This was about disenfranchising people. This is about holding down the number of votes. And these are the kind of tricks and the kind of schemes and the kind of backdoor things that conservatives have been getting away with for years. This isn't new. It's just that they got caught. And if I remember right, they got caught because, I think that the guy actually put his own phone number on the thing, or his own address on the ads. I mean, when he filled out the paperwork had his stuff on it. So they were able to trace it back to him, which was really stupid. But the case is going to be bound over and will be heard. And I'm hoping the Third Circuit Court there. I'm hoping they lock them up. Maybe they could be cell buddies. Kind of a weird thing. Some interesting legislation in Missouri. This is one of those things that I've been waiting for. They have introduced these two guys, this representative from Missouri, Jeff Coleman. He has introduced House Bill 482 in Missouri, the Stop Social Media Censorship Act. This is going to prohibit any social media platform with at least 75 million users. And again, don't know where they pulled that number out of. Probably reached around back and popped it out of the keister. But there it is, 75 million users, can't censor them at all. No censoring of politics or religious content. People should be able to spew whatever idiotic political things, even if they're going to come force vaccinate you if you get a mail-in ballot, or any crazy religious schemes that you've coming out with. All of that is perfectly fine. And if a social media platform takes anything down, parties can seek statutory damages of $75,000 per offense. Now, they do make exceptions. Any speech that is found obscene, from a false impersonation, or enticing violence. Now, the obscene, what is obscene? And I know the Supreme Court ruled that you'd know it when you see it. Okay. So as long as there aren't naked women, then it won't be obscene. Is that what I'm getting? Since that's how conservatives' minds think. Except in Louisiana, number 5 on Pornhub. And as long as they say it's them. So you get people like David Duke, you get people like Berkman, you get people like this Wall who are willing to put their name on horrible stuff. They should be able to say the most egregious things possible. That's not how free speech works, and it's not how corporate America works. Now, am I thrilled that we have to have these conversations, that you can't be sane and rational, and that you can't be held accountable for your words? I've said from the beginning, I think that speech shouldn't be censored. I've been very clear on this from the beginning. I think you should be held accountable for it. And I don't blame Twitter or Facebook for any of it. I think if you put something stupid on, I think you should be held accountable for it. And that means, like anything, you can be drawn into court. And I don't see anyone saying that the user should be held liable for what they write. If there's defamation, if there's harassment, if there's some kind of intimidation, if there's some kind of a violation of the law, that they should be held accountable. I don't see that kind of responsibility coming from the Republican Party. But the Stop Social Media Censorship Act, no, we can't have these platforms censoring their content. Now, understand, you have the ability to go, you know what? I'm not going to participate. Anything I put on social media is for public consumption or to be done away with. I don't care. Now, I find it interesting that people who think that their tweets are some kind of, it's their gold and it's their private property, and that by violating Twitter or Facebook or any of the social media platforms' rules of service, that somehow they're entitled to something. It's crazy to me. I actually read the rules of service. I don't understand a word of it. But what I do understand is I'm, 1, not a Philadelphia lawyer, and 2, if you violate, the rules of good sense that my mother taught me when I was a kid, you should probably be thrown off. That you shouldn't write things or attack people in ways that you wouldn't want your own mother to see. Now, I used to think like that. And then I saw what happened on January 6th, where a lot of mothers were, doing some pretty crazy and outrageous things. Now, the weird thing is there are a bunch of these bills going across the country. This is not new. There are a bunch of these social media bills that are going to be flying around because everybody in the Republican Party is apoplectic over the fact that Donald Trump got banned. Donald Trump incited a riot. Donald Trump attempted a coup. And oddly enough, 54% of Republicans want him back. We are most certainly in crazy times. And finally, on the undoing things that happened during the Trump era, a California judge has allowed the state's net neutrality law to go fully into effect. They, right when the FCC, Agent Pai, I think his name is, Agent Pai, who was the FCC head under Trump, as soon as they did away with net neutrality, California went and said, nope, we're gonna put a plan into place, and a good one. You have this judge who was a George W. Bush appointee who said, look, the reality is, looking at Texas as the backdrop, if there's no cop on the beat, there's nobody to regulate the FCC to regulate what companies can do with their ISPs, we're going to end up like Texas. And the internet provider companies, the AT&Ts, the Comcast, the Verizons, the Charters, those folks, they argued, well, we've been good so far. We haven't throttled people back much. We haven't done horrible things that people said. We haven't promoted, too much of other people's content for pay yet. And the judge, I don't buy the argument at all because you're just playing nice. And I like this guy. I think he gets it. So he's going to allow California's law to go into place, and hopefully hopefully the next person at the FCC will undo the damage that the Trump administration did and reapply net neutrality and get the profit out of how we get our content. Interesting stuff. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Bob Ney is going to be back to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day. Right back.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
The economic toll from the storms could reach as high as $50 billion.
Texas power crisis over for now. Water crisis continues. Texas Republicans that falsely scapegoated wind energy are getting big bucks from the fossil fuel industry. U.S. rejoins the Paris Climate Agreement. Plus, the case for rebuilding U.S. infrastructure for climate resilience.
All of those cases and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
With millions of Texans without water and heat, we see the vulnerability of windmills, especially when they're frozen.
And we see the propaganda value of Fox News. Never mind that 80% of Texas power that relies on fossil fuels. That was also frozen. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, things looking up in Texas at least?
Yes, Texas has begun to thaw, and electricity has slowly returned for most customers in the state a week after it was walloped by a massive, deadly record winter storm that knocked out power, heat, and water amid sub-freezing temperatures to nearly 4 million people. Now it's also a water crisis. Hundreds of municipal water systems in the state literally froze. Now millions of residents are under boil water notices. Millions more in Louisiana and Mississippi face the same crisis. President Joe Biden has signed a new major disaster declaration, freeing up federal emergency disaster and recovery funding. The statewide power failures were primarily triggered by the state's deregulated and privatized electric grid that did not require private power companies to winterize their systems. So they didn't, preferring to pocket the profits instead. And the state's customers are paying the price, literally. Some retail utility customers have already received bills in the thousands of dollars because the Texas deregulated system allows that. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott has pledged investigations into the catastrophic system failures and says state leaders are moving to alleviate massive energy bills triggered by the storm.
He better not look too close in that investigation.
The Texas grid is primarily based on natural gas and coal plants, which failed. But Earther reports that Republicans who tried to falsely blame renewable energy for the power outages are, surprise, recipients of, quote, a dizzying amount of money contributed by the fossil fuel industry.
What?
Republican senators Ted Cruz and John Cornyn and Republican Representative Dan Crenshaw were the top three loudest anti-wind voices from Texas. They alone snagged more than $1.1 million from the oil and gas industry in the 2020 election cycle.
You get what you pay for.
The catastrophic Texas power outage is also just the latest sign of the risks that increasingly extreme weather, intensified by man-made climate change, now poses to the nation. Cascading crises waiting to happen due to our failure to invest in, maintain, and upgrade America's aging infrastructure for decades. The record winter storm triggered power outages from Oklahoma to Ohio, halted 1/3 of U.S. oil production, and disrupted vaccination distribution in 20 states. Economic losses could top $50 billion from a single storm.
You get what you pay for.
The Texas power disaster underscores again the warnings of environmental groups about climate change. U.S. infrastructure is not prepared for the present, much less the future.
Yeah, but that is a lot of money to get from the fossil fuel industry, don't you think?
Biden's newly minted Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg connected the dots between the catastrophic failures in Texas and ongoing record billion-dollar disasters in the U.S. in recent years. He made the case on on CNN for Congress to pass Biden's Build Back Better infrastructure proposal to harden the nation's critical systems for resilience against accelerating climate impacts.
The question is, how far do we want to let America fall behind before we finally do something?
I don't know. Let's ask the oil companies.
But I think we've come to a moment where it's very clear, in some cases, crushingly and bluntly made clear by things like what Texans are suffering through this week, that America cannot wait any longer, that we can't afford not to act.
Finally, some good news. The U.S. has officially rejoined the United Nations Paris Climate Agreement as President Biden erases former President Trump's withdrawal from the landmark international compact for all countries to cut their contribution to greenhouse gas emissions that cause man-made climate change. In remarks to the Munich Security Conference late last week, Biden urged government leaders to meet the climate crisis with the urgency that it requires.
We can no longer delay or do the bare minimum to address climate change. This is a global existential crisis, and we'll all suffer the consequences if we fail. We have to rapidly accelerate our commitments to aggressively curb our emissions and to hold one another accountable for meeting our goals and increasing our ambitions.
Wow, it's as if we never left. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, interesting story out of New Jersey. Evidently, the boss, who pled not guilty today to DUI charges, evidently one day he was at New Jersey Sandy Hook National Recreation Area with some friends. He claimed he had 2 small shots of tequila. Actually blew a .02 on the breathalyzer, which the legal limit is .08. So well under the legal limit, but was arrested for DUI and drinking in a public place and all that stuff. Evidently, Sandy Hook National Recreation Area, alcohol is prohibited. So he was arrested and all of that stuff. Today, they dropped the DUI charge because clearly it was below the legal limit. Fined him $500 plus $40 in court fees for taking 2 drinks of tequila in a park. I got to tell you, when I was younger and I was drinking more, if that I'd still be in jail. I mean, if that's the limit, it's crazy. What the hell? In my view, way too many cops on the streets. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, our good friend, former Ohio Congressman, political analyst Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you, Rick.
I'm looking at this story, and I guess I'm just feeling old. I think about Bruce Springsteen.
Well, if you're old, I'm ancient. Go ahead.
I'm thinking about the old Bruce Springsteen songs. The carburetor wide open and foot pedal to the metal, and that whole hard driving, live free kind of thing. And to get pinched for taking a drink of tequila in a park is just insane to me.
I have a friend who was handcuffed and arrested for throwing a ball to his dog in Florida on the beach. I kid you not. Okay?
So this is where conservatives get me. This is where some of my conservative friends have me on their side. We got way too many laws, way too many cops, way too much in people's everyday lives that they're not harming anyone. Yet, corporate America, we don't seem to police them anymore. So we're deregulating them. We're deregulating, we want to put one guy on a giant train, but we got multiple cops in the park to find Bruce taking a sip of tequila. It's nuts to me.
You got the Bruce thing. You got my friend that literally happened 2 weeks ago. He tossed the ball to his dog, and they came up, you can't do that, and put him in cuffs, took him down to jail, all right, in cuffs. But you got the banksters, the bank gangsters, I call them, that can do all kinds of things illegally And then they pay a $10-20 million fine. It's okay. They're never cuffed.
Yeah, I'm waiting. Are we going to see perp walks out of what happened in Texas? I mean, this is the thing that bothers me. They literally pulled. And now look, Springsteen can afford it. He can afford the best lawyer money can buy.
Right.
He's got all the resources in the world. And this is. But what about some poor schmuck who just was out with a couple of buddies? They were hanging out like I used to do. I'm sure you did too.
Sure.
And you get now your life is ruined, all because you took a shot of tequila.
Like I said, my friend just come up and go, "Hey, you can't throw the ball to your dog." So, which they did, then cuffed him. Cuffed him.
So, but here's the thing: you go, "Hey, you can't do that. Don't do it again." And okay, I won't do it again. And you move along.
Yeah. No, $240 later. I mean, but yeah, it's the days of the hey, let me talk to you. Don't do that. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. That day's kind of gone.
Yeah, and this is where I'm in this mindset, and I've been saying this for a while. We got way too many cops. We've got way too many policemen. They got with nothing to do and feeling that they need to justify what they're doing. Look, I'm okay. Just sit there, just stand on the corner, look nice, but don't cause any problems. Stop with this.
Well, if you go into small town America where they don't have, tons and tons of policemen per capita, you won't see a lot of this. There'll be some discretion, but then you go to certain parts and everybody's walking around looking for something to do, I guess.
Yeah. No, see, I remember I grew up in a place where they had a lot of cops, but they were, hey, you did something stupid. Stupid, don't do that. Go home. All right. Not everything ended up with people wearing bracelets. Now, right. And in fact, not everybody. And this is another one of my pet peeves. When I was a kid, it was always put your hands on the hood, and and they come up behind you, they handcuff you and all that stuff. Now it's you're tackled and slammed to the ground, 6 people holding you down. I mean, it's a whole now military tactical operation to get one guy who took a shot of tequila in handcuffs. It's insane.
Yep. Different world.
Yeah, and this is where and I don't want to belabor this point, but this is where. Some conservatives get my attention. This is a bit I appreciate
Overboard.
You indulging me.
Oh yeah, like I said, this happened to my friend he called me from Florida, and I said, "What?" And he said, "Yep, I got in cuffs."
What did they do with the dog?
Oh, well, that's the other thing. Well, he called a friend of his, and she came down and got the dog. They would have taken the dog to the pound.
Oh my God!
She came down and got the dog. So that's how it ended.
Jeez. Whatever happened to the old days? They issue a citation and here pay. It's like a $40 fine.
Then the prosecutor got into it, and he paid a court fine, but he literally picked up the ball and threw it to his dog and didn't know. He's from Ohio, by the way.
Okay.
Had no idea you could not throw a rubber ball to a dog. And instead of telling him, they said, "Well, you can't do that." And he said, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry." And then they said, "Put your hands behind your back." And that was it.
No, that's even dumber than taking a shot of tequila, because at least the sign was posted no alcohol. I get that.
At least you get a shot of tequila, too, rather than, your dog causing you to be in handcuffs,
Well, the good thing, I guess, now my mind is going into all these weird places, because at least the cop didn't shoot the dog.
Well, exactly. Or him in handcuffs.
Or him in handcuffs. No, and look, I am supportive of police when they're not wrong.
Sure.
I'm not on the defund the police bandwagon,
gotcha.
But there are just some things. Come on, be a decent human being.
Same with me. I have law enforcement in my family, so same thing. But there's a right and there's a wrong. You see those cases, and you think, why do the superiors not jump on these policemen to say, look, we've got other people that are out there, shooting people and doing things, and focus on them.
What I do last bit on this, what I do find interesting is nowhere in the article did they name who the policeman was.
Well, that is interesting.
Nowhere did they say Officer John Taylor arrested the boss for drinking 2 shots of tequila. Because look, Bruce Springsteen in right. New Jersey is as close to a god as you can possibly get.
I know where you're going with this, right? That policeman doesn't want his name in the paper. He's going to get static from other police. Exactly.
I gotta imagine it wouldn't be good for him. And that's one of those things where maybe another job is in line.
Right.
He's probably the guy who would have arrested his own mother.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on. Today, the big news for me, anyways, Joe Manchin's going to support the representative for Deb Haaland, I guess is how you pronounce her name, for Interior Secretary. That's a big thing, isn't it?
Well, it is a big thing, and I don't think you're going to see Manchin necessarily trying to make a name going down the list. He's well calculated. I do like the theory out there that, and while I've got the theory this did a twofer for Manchin, but there was an offering, quote, without saying there was an offering of the one position, which was Tandon, and she was downed by Manchin, but she had made a lot of comments about a lot of people, including Bernie Sanders, on and on about him. So he takes that step, and at first everybody's like, "Oh, Manchin's going to go down the line," but he didn't. He went ahead and didn't support her, so they pulled that back. But maybe that also gave Manchin the ability to say, "Hey, I'm kind of a wild card," but in reality, he'll take an honest look at appointments.
Yeah, that's a nice way of looking at it. I'm still saying what they give him, what he get. I mean, at the end, this better than anyone. This is a game of horse trading.
Well, yeah, right, and on that aspect of what did he might get some goodwill for that. I'm not saying that he doesn't, but I think on the one appointment he kind of did them a favor and also himself, and kind of schmoozed up to Bernie Sanders and even Mitch McConnell, for statements that she had made, and so he kind of came out okay on that. Better than I thought.
He's going to smell okay on the other side. Now you brought up Neera Tandon, who it's appearing that they're probably going to pull her nomination.
Oh, I think so. I think they have to. I mean, she can. Bernie Sanders was low key about it, but Manchin wasn't low key. So Manchin kind of did what maybe Bernie wasn't going to do or didn't want to do, and Manchin went after her, and she made statements she apologized for, but she made so many statements so many times. It's difficult. I think that one that they pull. And you lose one, and then you gain a few others.
Yeah. So, what do you think of the argument that she was probably really close to Hillary Clinton, and they she was close to the Clintons. She was the head of the Center for American Progress,
and she was also close to John Podesta.
Yeah.
And here's a theory out there, and it was in a little story today, but. The Clintons were trying to get somebody loyal to them, more loyal to them than Biden. This is supposed out there. And so the Biden White House went along with it, kind of knowing that this one might be one that is a throwaway. I think there might be some legs to that here and there. I don't think that they sat down and deviously plotted. I'm talking about Biden administration, but maybe the Clintons pushed and pushed and pushed hard for this, and finally somebody in the White House said, "Oh, okay." She served in the Senate. He was president of the United States. Throw it out there. Let them go after the votes.
Yeah, I mean, because as you know as well as anyone how this works. I mean, you got a lot of people throwing names out for. It's not like Joe Biden individually picked every one of these names.
Right.
There were people who suggested. I'm sure he had, final say. But a lot of these names get thrown here. Here's the bang. There's the cabinet.
Right.
And you want to make sure that all of your foot soldiers are kind of in line to get your agenda moved through. So I thought Tandon was an interesting choice. She wasn't an Obama alum, so at least I didn't think so.
Right.
So I thought she was an interesting choice. But I'm going, OMB. How powerful of a position is OMB?
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's not like he lost the Attorney General. It's not like he lost the head of the U.S. EPA. There'll be somebody else that can run, OMB. And again, when you look at it, and I know there's theories and conspiracy theories out there, but this may be very well one where the staff came in, and you're right. Biden picked, majority of his people, but look, staff comes in, they do this screening committee and say, hey, this is one coming from the Clintons. If they're previous power brokers, let them go after the votes. Let them go after Manchin. Let them work on this. They're going to do that. And all of a sudden, it doesn't get accomplished, and, they pull it, and they put up another name that they get. But they satisfied putting the name in the system.
It was out there. Sorry, but next. We'll see who comes up next. Any inside thoughts on who may be next?
No, I don't know. I haven't heard anything because they haven't officially, pulled her. Yeah. They will pull her.
But
yeah, I think so as well.
There's other battles.
I want to get your thoughts on Afghanistan. You know, we were supposed to be out May 1st. They were supposed to pull everybody out, I guess, which was Trump's one of his final things. They're talking it might not happen. It might happen. What are you hearing?
Well, I think that overall, if you look at the big picture, I think that the Biden administration has played their hand perfectly at this point in time in the Mideast. I really do. I've got to give them an A+ for navigating one of the roughest terrains of the world. And I don't mean just how there are caves. I mean politically tough terrain. And they've done that, how they made their calls, how they're treating Mohammed bin Salman, MBS of Saudi Arabia, how they're dealing with, everybody basically in the Mideast. And so what's been laid on their lap, and this one's going to be very, very interesting, and there's three choices that President Biden has, and I don't think he's going to make one of the choices I'll mention here, but he has 10 weeks left because that was the clock ticking down as to when, according to the deal Trump made, we leave Afghanistan, then the Taliban directly is communicating with the Afghan government for, quote, a peace settlement. So we have 10 weeks left. So the president can, say, okay, I'm going to do that in 10 weeks. Troops are out, they're gone. He can pull out of the deal and return to a ton of conditions. I highly doubt he's going to do that. The president doesn't have the Trump mentality of, I can make the better deal. Every deal's bad. He doesn't have that mentality.
Right.
He's looked at these different, China, the tariffs, he's kept those so he can negotiate on his own accord. So I don't think he's going to take the second one of let's, just redo the whole thing because Joe Biden can make, quote, the better deal. Because it's a precarious deal, or he can ask for an extension to the deadline. So he's going to do one of the two, but he has 10 weeks to do it. I don't think this is the, complete end of the world where if he does choice one of taking the troops out or choice three of seeking a temporary extension, I don't think it's the end of the world for him on the Afghan policy. To redo all the conditions, that would be very tough.
Yeah, I'm of the number one. Gather the sheep, get the flock out. We've been there way too long.
We've done the longest war that we've been involved with in our history. We've had a train wreck in Iraq. Syria, is what it is. So other people are key players over there in Syria, like Russia and Iran. And I think that it fits in line for him to pull the troops out. It fits in line with something that was frankly popular for Trump with the progressive side of things to bring the troops out of there.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset. I've been on that wagon for a while.
Long time.
We got to get out of all of these misadventures.
Right. Exactly.
And I have people saying, well, if we do that, if we cut and run, you're gonna, all the lives that were sacrificed and all of that. I'm going. You don't keep sacrificing more lives.
Exactly. It's too late. What do we achieve? And also, we cannot broker a deal between the Taliban and the Afghan government. We've been supportive of enough. They have to make their own deal.
Yeah, you brought up MBS, Mr. Bonesall. Evidently, there's a call coming up with the Saudi king.
Yes, I mean, I love this aspect of anything that right now that President Biden's doing. This is a very strong position for him to be in, and he's making a call to the real king of Saudi Arabia. We all say Mohammed bin Salman. I do like to call him Mr. Bonesaw, MBS as he's known, but he's not the king. The Saudi Arabia king is 85. He has dementia, King Salman. So, yes, MBS runs the kingdom, but Biden administration is having the president directly call the king of Saudi Arabia, King Salman, and he's going to bring up the Khashoggi report because that's coming out this week about, the emphasis of having a report that has Mohammed bin Salman involved with this murder of Khashoggi, the journalist who was an American resident.
No, because we've talked about this before, and the reason I bring this up is because we've talked about this before, and you think that this could have been what brought MBS down if we put pressure on them. Do you think it's still possible?
Oh, I think this is going to severely weaken him. Look, this is the United States. In the height of this entire mess and the murder of Khashoggi and the aftermath, the only thing that kept MBS alive was President Trump and Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner made 85 phone calls to him in 1 month. That's documented. It's the only thing that kept him going. Otherwise, I think the entire world would have banded together to put such pressure on the kingdom. MBS would have taken a back backseat role. But he survived quite a lot. In fact, he got military equipment when the Congress itself, including people like Lindsey Graham, said don't give it to them. He got it. Now, President Biden's coming in and he's setting a new tone. So I'm not saying that the Biden administration, by what they're doing, will remove him, and that's not necessarily their intent, but they're making it crystal clear who they are going to talk to, and that's going to be the king. So this immediately delegates him to a second stand-down role. I'm talking about MBS.
Right.
I just think it's a brilliant move, and I think it's a good move. And if MBS wants to rehabilitate himself, then he needs to do that versus the nonsense that he's put out there of how he's reforming the kingdom.
So any chance of there being one of those really great photo ops of the orb and everybody putting their hands on the orb?
I don't think you're going to see that, or the sword dance. I don't think you're going to see it. I lived in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1983, and I worked for the American side of a joint venture over there. The Saudis have a lot of money. When Trump came there, they had, my friends in Saudi Arabia told me that there were TV screens every X amount of 3 feet with his picture on them going down the highways, And I just don't think you're going to see that happen with Biden. Biden's been around foreign policy, for a long, long time, more than some of the people have been on this earth, right, 30-some years. He's been around it. He knows, and they know that he's a different breed.
Yeah, good. And finally, Biden's gaining confidence from people on the coronavirus response.
Well, he is. In fact, there's another poll that was out. I just read about it 2 hours ago, Rick, that has the two most popular, I don't know if you saw this, the two most popular political people right now, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders in the country. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
They're the two most popular.
And it better be, because they better get something done. And this is where...
Well, yeah, it can be unpopular. Let me stress that. You know it, I know it. But when it comes to that, they had the poll. And then on this aspect, on the COVID response, right now, Americans are seeing and anticipating they're going to have improvement in their lives, and they're going to get some path to normal. Now, something close to it. When they were polled, they didn't say it has to be, the way it was, but something close to normal in the coming months. So right now, the confidence level is high, with 63% of the respondents saying that they're confident, and then 36% saying they're not very confident, or not confident at all, but not very confident. So he's got the majority, but he has to kick this in. He's got to get the vaccines out there, and then I know I'm being brutalized by friends about this, but Dr. Fauci doesn't need to make every statement for this administration.
I agree.
And I'm starting. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. I was not a enemy in my mind of Dr. Fauci, or that he was this or that. In the last 7 days, I'm starting to say, be careful. Something's going on. He needs to be much more clearer. And there is a President Biden, and he has a plan. So I'm not saying that I'm on the whoa, Fauci's got to go list, but I've got to tell you, I'm starting to have a few hesitations.
No, especially because I have a listener who he has been right all along from the beginning of this pandemic. His model has been spot on. He's a PhD. He's a brilliant guy. And he's telling me March is going to end, middle to end of March is going to be bad as this new variant takes over, and we got to get these vaccines out there, and the boosters that are coming along with them. This stuff's got to get rolling.
It's got to get rolling. That's why I've been a little critical in the last few days of Fauci, because he's making some statements on TV that makes you say, should I really get that vaccine? Should I get that vaccination? So they've got to be careful. Let's put him aside for a second. The president's got to roll this out, and yes, he's popular now, but this is the number one thing. There's other important items, I know, education, transportation, et cetera, and the stimulus bill, but this is the big deal, and he's got to roll it out, get it going, get it increased, get it in the gymnasiums, so you're not sitting 4 people in a pharmacy.
So just so you know, my friend Harvey K. in Wisconsin told me that that's how they're doing it in Wisconsin. He said they went to the university. They had, it was extremely efficient. They were rolling. I think he said like 5,000 people in the day were getting through.
I tried to get a buddy of mine who's ill, tried to get him shots. I went on the computer, set my alarm for 3 o'clock in the morning, talked to his wife yesterday. Ohio State's going to have this big inoculation. That's how he's going to get his. You know, 2 of us trying for 5 days didn't work in a pharmacy. So that's how it's going to happen. And Wisconsin, Tennessee's doing it, drive-throughs in the parking lots, and you can sit by the side of with your car, and after 15 minutes you can leave. I mean, there's ways to do this, and I think we learn from Wisconsin and Tennessee and any other area that can do it.
Yeah, it's something we need to do. Bob, I appreciate the time. As always, great stuff, my friend.
You too. Thank you.
But no, I mean, Biden's got 3 things. He's got to get the vaccines out and take care of this pandemic. You got to get the rescue package pushed through, and we need a massive infrastructure bill. We need massive funding for infrastructure to get the jobs back over the summer so that we have a big construction year. It's that simple to me. We need the money right now to keep everybody above boards. We need to whip out this virus, and we need to get people back to work in the spring and fall, spring through the summer and into the fall. That's what's going to help keep the Democrats in charge of the House and the Senate, and hopefully expand some margin so we can keep doing good things. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.